So another Azerbaijan Grand Prix is in the books, and Oscar Piastri took a fantastic victory over Charles Leclerc. And if you can hear any noise in the background, the paddock is still abuzz with the sound of packing up. They've got to get all of that freight over to Singapore in a week's time, so not long turnaround now. But let's get on to today's race. Alex, fantastic job by Oscar Piastri. You've spoken to Andrea Stella. We've heard a lot about his race. Let's take us through it, please.
Yeah, fantastic race from Oscar Piastri. I mean, obviously Charles Leclerc started on pole position, finished second. Brilliant racing from both drivers throughout. We were having a little debate whether this is the race of the season. You think you're in favour of that, right?
Yeah, I think so.
I'm slightly leaning more towards the British Grand Prix in Silverstone, the emotion of Lewis Hamilton winning and the rain and everything. But nevertheless, what a competition. Fantastic driving between Leclerc and Piastri in their battles at all times. But yeah, Piastri, first stint when he was running second, obviously on the medium tyres, dropped back quite a long way from Charles Leclerc, and McLaren concluding that just he pushed too hard simply on that medium tyre. So yeah, the opening stint, Piastri obviously dropping back from Charles Leclerc, who looked pretty dominant at that point, I thought. He was pulling away pretty much every time through sector one, and Piastri just going a bit too hard on those mediums, not having enough come the end of the stint. And then the undercut here looked like a little bit of a long pit stop for Ferrari. Leclerc trying to sort of bed the hards in while Piastri fired them up to temperature, and Stella said that actually he got the tyres in the sweet spot and he just went for the move. And I think he disobeyed the team order or didn't go quite right with not a team order, no, and that's a very controversial topic at McLaren. An instruction from his engineer Tom Stallard to
take it cautiously, be smart.
Okay, well, it really worked out for him, didn't it? Basically, Andrea Stella also saying, look, he thought when the move was on, he thought Oscar's going to go long in a runoff and he's going to have botched it. But no, he said, actually, this is just this move. He said, this is one of those cases where the talent of the driver makes the difference. Piastri pulling it off, getting ahead, stunning move. And Leclerc couldn't fight back. He was in DRS for pretty much most of the race up until the last few laps, and repeatedly attacked. Piastri positioning his car superbly in defence. And every time, I thought this was key, although I think Piastri said in the press conference, the risks he was taking through sector 2 to try and get at least a bit of a gap ahead of Leclerc getting DRS on the main straight, that's what he felt was key. But from my point of view, also what he was doing at turn 1 when Leclerc was attacking was key. Because essentially, Piastri's pinched on a slightly tighter line, and Leclerc, you could see every time, I mean, he's doing the perfect racecraft there. You go, okay, that isn't available to me, I'll go slightly wider, I'll cut back and I'll get a better exit and I'll get you, but he couldn't do it. And Stella said the key thing there was the very first time Piastri tried that defence, he said he would not have known and didn't know if that was going to come off, if he was even going to make the corner, if he was going to be able to have a good enough traction to get stay ahead of Leclerc on the exit. It worked out and he just kept repeating it. Stella saying that's 90% Piastri, 10% McLaren's car, which is very good on traction. And yeah, I mean, the other thing was being in free air, that was absolutely key. You saw at various points when they were battling Sergio Perez, coming back and forth in the Red Bull. Shocker of a day for Max Verstappen, really. Red Bull blaming the setup on Verstappen's car compared to Perez for the difference between them. He was well down the order before the crash, ends up behind Lando Norris in 5th place on the road, 4th place for Norris. Great drive, Stella, absolutely delighted with his, basically said I couldn't see any faults in any of his laps. Piastri pulls away at the end, wins the second F1 Grand Prix, and basically saying this is the greatest win of my career.
Yeah, it was a fantastic drive, and he was taken all the way by Charles Leclerc. The interesting thing there was I asked Leclerc in the press conference basically where he kind of thought he'd lost it, because there was originally that kind of 6-second lead that he had over Piastri before their respective pit stops. As you've already said, Piastri came in and Leclerc came in a lap later, and that advantage was eroded, and it was about 4.5 seconds had just disappeared in that lap. And there were two things that Charles Leclerc regretted that he said were the main misjudgments from Ferrari. First of all, that he didn't, when he was passed, didn't think really too much of it. He thought, I can get past Piastri later, and that never really emerged. But the second one as well was how powerful that undercut was, and how powerful McLaren made that undercut as well, because as you said, Piastri got those hards switched on pretty much immediately, and it was not quite plain sailing as such, but it was a stout defence, and he made the magic happen. The
other key thing with the undercut, don't forget Lando Norris hadn't stopped because he was on the conscious strategy, starting on the tyres, holding up Sergio Perez had obviously stopped before Piastri. Stella saying such credit to Lando Norris from Stella's point of view that 50% of this victory should go to Lando, which, you know, considering all the chat we've been having about team orders and team harmony and things like that, it's quite a big statement from Andrea Stella. But yeah, I mean, at least from his point of view, both his cars are running at the end. not the case for Red Bull and Ferrari. What happened with the crash, JBL?
No, well, it was all getting very, very congested, wasn't it? Piastri had gone by that point. Leclerc's...
I would say superbly congested, but anyway.
Superbly congested. Well, Piastri was gone, and Leclerc had basically seen the last of his tyres. He was really struggling with the rears at that point. And it was just basically a matter of time of, was he going to stay ahead of Perez? Was he going to stay ahead of Carlos Sainz, who was rapidly catching? This three-way battle at the front. Sainz was coming up, creeping up behind them. And it got to that kind of pinch point, didn't it, on the exit of turn 2. Leclerc was getting passed by Perez, somehow managed to hold it. Sainz was in the mix, and then suddenly there was this sort of, let's say, convergence between the two drivers. I'll put it mildly.
Very F1 word though.
Yeah, there's a convergence between the two drivers, and suddenly there was quite a big accident.
You can tell you're trained as an engineer, can't you? Anyway, right, carry on.
There was quite a big accident, and both drivers apportioning blame to each other, of course, Alex.
Of course they did. It was ultimately goes down as a no further action from the stewards. From my point of view, I think, yeah, it was a racing incident, but at the same time, Sergio Perez, he's not running behind Carlos Sainz. He was enough alongside him, and with acres of space on the left-hand side, that he should have anticipated Sainz was going to defend. I think it was, of course he was going to try something. He's not just going to let him by. So I think Perez, if we have to apportion blame, which fine, let's do it. 60-40 Perez's fault really, because it just seems so needless. For what it's worth, there were obviously weird incidents of overtaking under virtual safety car conditions around the checkered flag that included Max Verstappen. All drivers just given warnings for what happened. So yeah, that was a controversial end to the race, but some good news for other drivers down the field. We got Franco Colapinto in 8th, doing what Logan Sargent couldn't do for Williams. I mean, technically on the road he never actually finished in the top 10. He had to get into, other cars disqualified to get into the points in Austin last year, but Colapinto vindicating Williams' decision to switch out Sargent, get points in 8th place, and Ollie Behrman in 10th. Now, yeah, Colapinto, I thought he was very impressive, JBL. I don't know what you made of him.
No, I thought I've been very impressed by him so far. I think when he came into that city, he felt like a bit of an outsider. It sort of felt like a risk that Williams maybe wasn't willing to take, and then it did. And I think, again, as you said, they've been vindicated completely. 2 races in, he's in Q3. Yeah, sure, Alex Albon had the fan incident in Q3, but outqualifies Albon nonetheless. Gets in Q3 anyway, and points on his first outing, and he was, sitting 10th by the time the accident unfolded, so he gets a little bit more, but he was, finishing in the points anyway. It's not like he was gifted a whole bunch of them. And you've brought up Behrman as well, also very impressed by him as well. Really strong performer. I think there was a portion in the first stint where he just sort of started to fall away a little bit, but he atoned for that in the second stint, certainly.
I can explain why that was, actually, because I've been down speaking
what
to
a segue.
It's almost like we're natural, which obviously we're not. But yes, Ollie Behrman effectively was a bit stung by what he experienced in FP2 when it came to the graining on the medium tyres, and effectively with everything he was feeling, with what the team had told him to do pre-race and what was going on at the time, he didn't push hard enough. So there was life left in the tyres, time left available on the race, and eventually his pace was so bad, not particularly Behrman's fault, but he was doing what instructed him and reacting to what he was feeling. Hulkenberg he was ordered to give the position to Hulkenberg that you saw late in the race. The reason why Hulkenberg actually ends up behind Behrman, a little bit confusing because it wasn't really shown, and that Colapinto, as you say, Jake, was already in 10th when the crash ahead happened, was because Hulkenberg had clipped a wall in the closing stages. That, the turn 15, very fast left, very famous left at the top of the hill, just clipped it, thought he got a puncture, wasn't really sure what was happening. Start of the next lap, going into turn 3, Colapinto pounces, and then following the crash, Hulkenberg, on a tyre that he already thinks has a puncture, that's why he's a bit confused, hits debris, sort of backs off, passes a green flag marker board, and Lewis Hamilton, who had superbly battled his way past Ollie Behrman, who was excellent in defence on that, showed absolutely no fear. Both of them power past him, and Hulkenberg's left feeling, we don't know what happened there, that was a bit of an error. But yeah, Behrman, superbly impressive. I'm told Haas are absolutely delighted with him, that he slotted in really well already. Team really happy with him, happy with his performances, happy with his attitude, happy how he's integrated, basically. So a good result for Behrman, quite obviously. 2 substitute races this season, scored points in both. Mercedes, Lewis Hamilton finishing just ahead, George Russell surprise podium. JBL will finish with them. It was a race of misery for Lewis Hamilton, according to Toto Wolff, but at least they got some silverware with George Russell.
Yeah, exactly. I think, Lewis was sort of a little bit upset that if he started from the pit lane, knew it would be difficult. When he's down, he's down. And he was in that mood of, well, it was always going to be impossible to overtake anyway. I don't necessarily think that's true, but I think he was really certainly struggling out there. But George, that medium stint at the start, he said that car was barely worthy of a top 10, and he was really, really struggling. You could kind of see the way that he was dropping off, but he pitted, got back ahead of Verstappen, and on the hard tyres, it felt like a completely new car. The pace was worthy of winning. I mean, he was well out of contention at that point, but it was the pace of a race-winning car. So Mercedes doesn't really understand why it was so Jekyll and Hyde, let's say, but it was certainly something for them to think about.
Don't forget, weird Friday for Russell with his engine issues in FP1 and FP2. Well, there you have it. That's the Baku weekend over. F1 reconvening in Singapore next week.